Hey everyone, welcome back. You're here, I bet, because the 79th group thing has really caught your attention.
Yeah, definitely been making headlines.
And maybe has you a little on edge too, right? All this talk of fraud. It's not exactly something you just brush off.
No, not at all. And it's a story that just keeps unfolding. More layers keep getting peeled back.
Exactly, and that's why we have you here today. You've been following this 79th group long before it hit the mainstream news. What's the real deal here? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, the first thing to remember is it's not every day that you see authorities actually stepping in, making arrests, seizing assets from a company that, at least on the surface, seemed to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's not just some minor regulatory slap on the wrist, right? This is a full-on investigation.
Exactly. It's a big deal. And there are some potentially serious consequences that could come out of this.
Okay, so some major red flags were obviously waving around, but for those of us who maybe haven't been, glued to every financial news update, let's take a step back for a second. What exactly was the 79th group? What were they offering that got people so interested in the first place?
So they were really pushing these loan note products, which basically means you're lending money to the company in exchange for getting a fixed return on that investment.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the returns they were promising, well, let's just say they were pretty eye-catching, even for investors who've seen it all.
Ah, the lure of those big profits. But I guess that's where things start to get a little iffy. You mentioned authorities taking action. What exactly triggered those investigations and those arrests?
Things really took a dramatic turn when 4 individuals connected to the 79th group were arrested. And on top of that, they seized assets at something like 5 different properties.
Wow.
That's not just routine regulatory stuff. That's a sign that authorities believe something pretty serious has been going down.
So you're saying they wouldn't make such a bold move unless they had some pretty strong evidence already?
Exactly. It seems they've been building a case for a while now.
And you've been watching this company for a while, even before all of this recent drama unfolded. Were there any warning signs early on? What were the red flags that caught your eye?
Oh, there were definitely some red flags. 3 big ones, actually.
Yeah.
First, those sky-high returns they were promising. Anytime you see investment returns that seem way too good to be true, well, they probably are. It's a huge red flag.
Makes sense. I mean, it's like trying to cheat the system, right? Something has to give.
Right. The second red flag was this security trustee called Castle Trust and Management Services Limited, and this one has since gone into liquidation.
Okay.
Now a security trustee is supposed to act as an independent overseer, basically protecting the interests of the investors.
Right, so it's like a safeguard?
Right. Exactly. So when that trustee goes under, it raises some serious questions about how the whole operation was being run and whether it was legitimate at all.
Yeah.
It's like if you found out the security guard at a bank was actually part of the heist.
Yeah, that analogy really hits home. It makes you wonder how much scrutiny there really was.
Absolutely. And then the third red flag, and this one really got my attention, were reports that the 79th group was using these overseas boiler rooms.
Boiler rooms, that sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, they can be.
Yeah.
Basically, they're high-pressure sales operations, often operating in countries with weaker regulations, and they use really aggressive tactics to push investments, sometimes targeting vulnerable individuals.
So not exactly the image of a trustworthy ethical investment firm.
Not even close.
Hmm.
All of these red flags taken together started pointing towards a very disturbing possibility, a Ponzi scheme.
Wait, a Ponzi scheme? That's a whole different ballgame. Now, for those of us who might not be familiar with that term, can you break down exactly what a Ponzi scheme is and why it's so dangerous?
Of course, a Ponzi scheme is like a financial house of cards, where the appearance of success is built on really shaky foundations. Basically, early investors get paid returns not from actual profits, but from the money that's coming in from new investors.
So it's basically robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Exactly, and it's a system that's designed to fail eventually, because at some point you run out of new investors, the money dries up, and the whole thing collapses, leaving a lot of people with devastating losses.
Okay, so we've got this potential Ponzi scheme, a company that might be built on some very shaky ground, and authorities taking some pretty drastic action. But who are the people behind all of this? Who are the faces of the 79th group?
Well, the key players here are David Webster, his sons Jake and Curtis, and then the CEO, a woman named Natalie Bellis. Now, they presented themselves, with a very carefully crafted image. It was all about family values, trust, loyalty. That kind of we're a family business approach can be incredibly effective, especially in making people feel like they're dealing with someone they can trust.
Right, it gives that sense of shared values, like you're part of something bigger than just a financial transaction.
Exactly, and that's what makes this whole situation even more unsettling.
Right.
Because if these allegations are true, then that carefully crafted image was just a facade,
Mm.
a way to gain the trust of unsuspecting investors and pull them into what might turn out to be a disastrous scheme.
So how did they actually convince people to invest? I mean, beyond just promising those big returns and, putting on that family business image, what were some of the tactics they used?
Oh, they were masters of persuasion, that's for sure. They used these glossy marketing materials, painted a picture of, effortless wealth and financial security.
Right.
They had these persuasive salespeople who knew how to push all the right buttons, play on people's dreams and their fears. And of course, there was the constant lure of those sky-high returns, dangling the possibility of getting rich quick with minimal effort.
It's that classic trap, isn't it? The
Mm.
promise of easy money. It's so tempting that it can make people overlook some really obvious red flags.
It's a powerful psychological force. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these tactics and to approach any investment opportunity with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely. But this isn't just about the 79th Group's leadership, right? You mentioned the idea of enablers earlier. Who else was involved in this and what roles did they play?
Well, fraud on this scale, it rarely happens in a vacuum. There's usually a whole network of people or entities that, whether they realize it or not, end up giving these operations a veneer of legitimacy. They become complicit, even if indirectly, in the harm that's being done.
So it's like a whole web of players, all connected, each contributing to the overall scheme.
Exactly. In this particular case, you have these introducers like New Capital Link. These are firms that connect investors with different investment opportunities. Now, you would hope that these introducers would be doing their due diligence, really vetting any venture before they recommend it to their clients. But sometimes in the pursuit of profits, those checks and balances, they kind of fall by the wayside.
So knowing the potential consequences, why do you think companies like New Capital Link choose to partner with ventures like the 79th Group? Is it just greed or is there something else going on?
It's complicated.
Oh.
There's definitely a financial incentive because these introducers, they typically earn commissions on the investments that they bring in. But it can also be a bit of naivete, believing they're actually helping their clients by connecting them with these supposedly lucrative opportunities. And sometimes it's just plain old willful blindness, choosing to ignore the warning signs because it's easier or more profitable to look the other way.
Yeah, it's that age-old conflict between profit and ethics.
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh.
And then there's that security trustee we talked about before, Castle Trust and Management Services Limited. Their collapse just adds another layer of complexity to all of this. Remember, their role was to protect the investor's interest, to act as an independent watchdog.
Right. So their failure just raises even more questions about the level of oversight and accountability in the whole system.
It really does. It makes you wonder if the watchdog isn't watching who is.
Yeah, that's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is. And then you have the involvement of law firms like JMW Group. They represented the 79th Group, and they went to great lengths to silence critics, including us.
What do you mean by silence critics? Like, did they actually threaten legal action?
Oh, yeah. We got hit with threats of defamation lawsuits, demands for damages. It was a pretty clear attempt to intimidate us and stop us from raising concerns about how the 79th Group was operating.
That's pretty outrageous. What made you decide to stand your ground, even with those legal threats hanging over your head?
We felt like it was our responsibility to speak out, to protect potential investors.
Yeah.
We couldn't just sit back and watch while people were potentially being drawn into a fraudulent scheme.
That took a lot of courage, especially going up against a powerful law firm like that.
It wasn't easy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But we felt like it was the right thing to do.
Okay, so we've uncovered quite a bit here. Potential Ponzi scheme, misleading marketing, this whole network of enablers. It's a pretty cautionary tale, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wondering what they can do to protect themselves. So what advice do you have for anyone out there who might have gotten caught up in all of this?
Well, if you think you might be a victim of this, the first and most important step is to contact the City of London Police.
Okay.
They are the ones leading the investigation, and gathering information from everyone who's been affected is absolutely crucial, to build a strong case.
So reporting it is essential, even if it feels like a long shot or maybe the details seem small or insignificant.
Absolutely. Every piece of information could be valuable. It all helps to put the puzzle together. And it's also really important to document everything you can, any communications transactions, any evidence you have of your involvement with the 79th Group.
That makes sense, creating a clear paper trail. And you mentioned earlier that Insolvency and Law is looking into potential recovery options as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're currently investigating every possible avenue for recourse, including potential third-party recovery actions.
Right.
And this would be against those regulated entities that basically enable the 79th Group's activities.
Okay.
So we're looking at legal options to hold those enablers accountable and hopefully recover at least some of the losses for investors.
So there's a possibility of not just going after the main players, but also those who help facilitate the scheme. But navigating all of that legal stuff can feel really daunting. What are some specific steps investors can take if they want to explore those recovery options?
The best first step is to reach out to us directly. We can talk through their individual situation, the potential legal avenues, and be upfront about the challenges involved.
Hmm.
It's important to understand that this process, it can be lengthy and complex, and there's no guarantee of success.
So managing expectations is key. It's not about promising a quick and easy fix, but about exploring all of the options that might be available.
Exactly. And this brings us to a bigger point, learning from this situation and taking steps to protect ourselves from similar schemes in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond this specific case, what are some of the key takeaways here? What can our listeners do to make sure they don't fall victim to these kinds of scams?
The biggest thing is due diligence. Before you commit any money, you need to do your homework. Research the investment opportunity thoroughly, the company behind it, their track record, their financials. Don't get swayed by fancy marketing materials or promises of unrealistic returns.
So don't just jump in head first because it sounds exciting. Take a step back and really critically evaluate the opportunity. But with so much information out there, where do you even start? What are some practical steps people can take to do that kind of due diligence?
Start by looking for red flags. We already talked about unrealistic returns being a major one. Also, be wary of any high-pressure sales tactics or anything that creates a sense of urgency. If someone is pushing you to make a decision quickly without giving you time to think it through, that's a huge warning sign.
Right. It's like those boiler rooms you described. They thrive on that pressure and that fear of missing out.
Exactly. Another red flag is a lack of transparency. If a company isn't willing to share information about their operations, their financials, their team, that's a bad sign. Ask yourself, are they being upfront and open about how they do business? Can you easily find information about them from reliable sources?
So it's not just about what they're telling you, but also what they might be hiding.
Exactly. Look for inconsistencies or gaps in their story. And never underestimate the power of independent research. Don't just rely on what the company is telling you. Go out and consult independent financial websites, regulatory bodies, reputable news sources. Get a more objective perspective.
It's about getting the full picture, not just the one they're trying to paint. But sometimes, even with all the research in the world, it can still be tough to understand all the complexities of finance. Would you recommend seeking out professional advice in these situations?
Absolutely. Talking to a financial advisor, an accountant, a lawyer before you make any big investment decisions can be so valuable. They can provide that unbiased perspective, help you understand all the complicated financial products, and really assess the risks involved.
So it can be like a guide helping you make more informed choices.
Exactly. Think of it this way. You wouldn't perform surgery on yourself, right?
Right.
You'd go to a medical professional. Investing your hard-earned money, it's no different. Getting expert guidance can save you a lot of headaches down the line.
It's an investment in your financial well-being. But even beyond due diligence and seeking professional advice, are there any other kind of mindset shifts or habits that can help people become more savvy investors?
One of the most important things is to develop a healthy skepticism. Don't be afraid to question everything. Ask tough questions. Demand evidence to back up any claims. And always be wary of anything that sounds too good to be true.
So it's about being an active participant in your financial decisions, not just a passive recipient of information.
It's exactly.
Take ownership of your financial future. And remember, investing always involves some level of risk. But by doing your research, getting expert guidance, and being aware of the potential pitfalls, you can really minimize that risk and make smarter decisions.
It's about empowering yourself with knowledge and making choices that align with your own financial goals. But what about those who have already been caught in a scam? What advice do you have for them?
Well, first of all, don't blame yourself. These schemes are designed to be deceptive, and even experienced investors can get tricked. It's important to remember that you're not alone. There are resources out there to help you get through this. Contact the authorities, seek legal advice, connect with support groups.
So take action even if it feels overwhelming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, there's no shame in asking for help. It's a sign of strength, not weakness.
That's so important. It's easy to feel isolated and embarrassed after something like this happens, but reaching out for support can make a huge difference. Absolutely. And one last thing I'd add is that financial literacy, it's a continuous journey. The more you learn about investing, the better equipped you'll be to spot these schemes and protect your money.
So it's not a one-time thing. It's about constantly learning and staying informed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads us to another important point, holding those responsible accountable.
Right. We talked about the potential legal consequences, but beyond that, is there a role for everyday people to play in making sure justice is served?
Absolutely. Reporting any suspicious activity to the authorities is so important. It can prevent other people from becoming victims, and it helps to strengthen the whole financial system. Think of it as a civic duty.
So if you see something, say something.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in fighting financial fraud.
That's a great point. Now let's bring it back to the 79th group. What's next for insolvency and law in terms of this case? What are your next steps?
Right now, our focus is on continuing our investigations, gathering as much information as we can to build a strong case. We're also working closely with the investors who've been affected, providing guidance and support as they go through this process.
And you're still encouraging anyone who might have been impacted to reach out to you.
Absolutely. We're here to help in any way we can, whether it's providing information, exploring legal options, or just lending an ear. We want to support those who have been affected by this.
Okay, that's fantastic. And we'll be sure to include your contact information again in the show notes so listeners can easily get in touch. But before we wrap things up, I want to touch on something you mentioned before, financial literacy. It's so crucial, yet it's often overlooked.
I completely agree. We need to give people the knowledge and skills they need to make smart financial decisions and protect themselves from these schemes.
So where can people go to learn more? What kind of resources are out there for those who want to boost their financial literacy?
Oh, there are tons of great resources, both online and offline. The Financial Conduct Authority's website is a great place to start. They have a bunch of educational materials on investing scams, consumer rights.
That's a great resource. And there are also a lot of really good books and podcasts that explain complicated financial concepts in a way that's easy to understand.
Yes, The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham is a classic for a reason. And for podcasts, I always recommend Planet Money. They do a great job of making economics fun and engaging.
Those are great suggestions, and I think it's important to say again that financial literacy isn't just for experienced investors, it's for everyone.
Definitely. Whether you're just starting out or you've been investing for years, there's always more to learn. And the more informed you are, the better protected you'll be.
Well said. I think that's a perfect transition point. But before we get to our final thoughts on this case, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to explore the wider implications of the 79th Group situation and leave our listeners with some thought-provoking insights. All right, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into this whole 79th Group situation. It's been a lot to process: red flags, enablers, due diligence, financial literacy. But before we let you go, I want to get your expert take on what's the one big takeaway you really want our listeners to remember from all of this.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
There's so much to think about here, but if I had to boil it down to just one core idea, it would be trust but verify.
Trust but verify. I like that.
Don't just let your guard down because something looks legit or because it's coming from someone you trust. Always take that extra step, do your own research, ask the hard questions, and be willing to walk away if something feels off.
Trust but verify. It's so simple but so powerful. And honestly, it goes way beyond just investing, right?
Absolutely. It's a good way to approach life in general, whether you're talking about business partnerships or checking out a politician's claims or even just picking someone to do work on your house. That idea of trust, but verify it, can really save you a lot of trouble in the long run.
It's about being smart, not being suspicious.
Right?
Having a good balance of trust, but also using your critical thinking skills.
Exactly. And when it comes to investments, that critical thinking has to include understanding that there's always some risk involved. Nothing is completely risk-free. But by doing your homework and getting advice from professionals, you can make choices that fit your comfort level and your financial goals.
So it's about taking charge of your financial future, not just letting things happen, but making informed decisions.
Well said. And I think this whole 79th Group situation is a really good example of how financial fraud can happen anywhere to anyone.
Yeah, it's not just about those huge scandals you see in the news.
Right. It can happen on a smaller scale, too, within communities, even with people.
It's like it often hides in plain sight, using trust and familiarity to its advantage.
Exactly. So we all need to be aware. We have to learn about the different ways financial fraud can happen so we can spot it and report it.
And if anyone out there needs help or advice or even just someone to talk to about what they've gone through, Insolvency and Law is there for them.
We are. We're dedicated to protecting the rights of investors and holding those responsible for financial misconduct accountable.
That's great to hear. And we'll make sure to include your contact information in the show notes so listeners can easily get in touch. So to everyone listening out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of financial fraud. Remember, knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and as always,